Hey guys, this is another episode of the Sovereign Entrepreneur podcast. This is going to be a one-on-one today. Danny is tied up with his job, but we have Nate Green on, who's a friend of a friend and now a friend of mine. He's a serial entrepreneur. Really interesting story. He's embarking on a new chapter in his life now, having just sold his company. He's also an author, so I think this is going to be a very intriguing conversation for myself and for all of our listeners. But with that, I'll let Nate take the floor and, give us some of his background, and then we'll delve into a variety of topics.
Rob, man, I really appreciate you having me on this. This is awesome. To all the listeners, thanks for taking the time out to hear a little bit about my insanities and story that I've been through. And we're going to jump into some fun stuff. So, man, it has been what a journey running through the entrepreneurial road and chasing down what we focus and set our attention to go after. And so I'm looking forward, Rob, just to dive into these pieces and figure out what you want to pull out of me so that your listeners can get the best bang for every single moment they spend in here.
Yeah. So would you mind just like giving your background, I guess, however much detail you'd like? What is the evolution of Nate Green over the last, 10 to 15 years, I guess, from a personal and business perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a great journey. Walking through my background, I was a police officer. I was 18 years old when I decided to go into the police academy and chasing that down. I love being a cop. It was a blast. Basically, the better the fight, the more the excitement that came out of me. I enjoyed that. My initial nickname was Dr. Death for a season because I saw so many dead bodies. And then after that, luckily through some fights, I showed some extra abilities to be able to go ahead and knock them out and take care of the issues. And so then I got the nickname Rook Nasty, which that's a whole nother story in itself. And so that lasted throughout my career. But unfortunately, I had a car accident and I was paralyzed for a few months. And then after that, a heart failure came to play where my brain and my heart didn't connect any longer and had major problems. So I had to retire. I was 23 years old, and there's that season where you hit those walls and you're like, man, like, what do you do? And that's where, earlier on, while I was a cop, you listen to these things in the back of your head. You listen to the guidance from people that have given you wisdom throughout your younger days. And while I was a cop, man, this thing my dad always told me, like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Always make sure you educate yourself. Always make sure that you go beyond just the scope of the today. And so I started going through this process of trying to figure out, what does Nate really can achieve? Like, what am I built for? And so I started doing personality tests, career tests, cognitive tests, any test I could get my hands on to really unwind what I was built to be. Obviously, the first thing that always came up was sales. And I'm like, I don't want to do sales. And so I started digging further and further. And in turn, the financial industries kept on coming up. And I was like, okay, well, let's look into this. And so I researched the different financial markets and I was like, okay, which one is scalable? Because I always had this entrepreneurial mindset. And so they went through this process and I dove deep of just researching one after another. And I found that, the accounting industry, tax and accounting, had such a wide range of abilities, especially if people had good personalities. And I might not have the best personality, but I definitely had better than most people inside that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at the scalability inside that space and started chasing that down. And that was when I started going to school for accounting. And then by the time the heart failure came and all that kind of stuff, I already had a roadmap. I was just planning on chasing it down after 20 years as a cop, not after 4. So a little fast track there. So luckily, you listen to the wisdom along the way and you pay attention to it. So, there's a lot to dissect there. So I don't know if you have any questions about that part before we dig into more.
I mean, that's incredibly inspiring. And like, I know Kyle, our mutual friend, has undergone a lot of health issues. I've had my fair share of suffering and pain in my life. But I think if you think about anyone that's kind of achieved a lot in their life, certainly entrepreneurs, your success as an entrepreneur in many cases is your function of your ability to tolerate pain and suffering and instability and volatility. And so like having the police background where you're getting exposed to some pretty jarring things, but then also, being temporarily paralyzed. I mean, that's a huge deal. I'm sure it was, a very mental journey alongside the physical journey of rehabilitation. I guess, like, what did you learn about yourself having gone through that experience? And what was the experience of reinventing yourself? Like, I'm sure it was like not easy, 23 years old, you're forced into an entirely new career, but I'm curious if you look back too, and you're like, that might've been the best thing that ever happened to me because that kind of was the catalyst for your entrepreneurial journey in some ways, right?
Yeah, it is crazy because I'll take even a step back. Let's go back
Sure.
to, when I was 8, 9, 10, all the way to maybe about 14 or 15. So my older brother was always the bigger, stronger, the better looking version of all the siblings. Like he was just like the
Okay.
dude of the dude, and man, he loved some attention. And so in that process, like being the smaller, weaker, younger version, there was always this competition that was going on that I had no idea I was even in a competition. It was pretty insane. And so, like, I was in these competitions that I was destined to fail at every single day. And so it was always physical. It was like, okay, we're wrestling. I just got crap beat out of me. Okay, it's push ups. Okay, it's this. It's like there was always these things physically. And so when you ask, what did I learn through this process? I learned that I was broken. I learned that I wasn't just physically broken, I was psychologically broken. And some of the massive realization didn't happen until a few years into business. But I realized during this process that all of what I considered success was based upon physical abilities, which is where, when I was in SWAT training, man, like I dominated. There was the only thing that somebody could do more than me was pull ups. I mean, I could run faster, I was quicker, I could take down houses, I could do everything so much faster than everybody else because I was squirrely. And so then you got this one guy that I called him biceps because all he could do was just do pull ups all day long. And so, but besides that, it was like everything was physical. When I physically became completely broken, whether it's paralysis or the heart failure, I realized I went from being able to run, 15 to 20 miles to I couldn't even run 5 blocks. And so, my heart would give out and completely reset. I mean, I was shocked back to life a few times, transported more times than I can remember. Literally, I can't remember some of them because I was unconscious. And so when you go through that and you realize how broken you are, when psychologically all what success looks like to you was based upon your physical capabilities, then you start hitting marks. You get your bachelor's, your master's degree, and you start cranking and you start building businesses and you start like hitting these great rewards and these great financial successes and these marks and achieving goals. And you realize, wait a second, I keep on posting higher goals and I don't live in achievement at all because it's not physical. And so I had to do a lot of inner work to disconnect like what success looked like because of physical capabilities, because I was incapable,
Sure.
and reconnect them to like other successes in life. And I'll be honest with you, like successes to me are more like a checklist. Like everything is like, okay, great. I achieved this. Cool. Boom. I sold the company. Cool. Boom. Here's how many cool. Like these are all great things.
Sure.
But like to me, like people ask me how I stay humble. I stay humble because like it's a checklist. I'm just lucky to be able to accept the success, much less be excited about it and things like that. So I'm still a little broken in there, but I've at least been able to disconnect success and physical capabilities. And so, how has that shifted, my future? Man, it has completely warped everything. I had to go back and reinvent who I was. Rook Nasty had to die. I had to figure out who was to come on the other side. And
It's an ego
Rook Nasty,
death a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was crazy. And so, walking through that journey, launching businesses and chasing this side down, it was a complete remapping and being able to even accept who I was in comparison to who I had been. And then not to mention doctors, during that situation, the doctors misdiagnosed me. They thought I had some kind of degenerative issue, and they thought that my lifespan was going to be shrunk. And had a much shorter timeline. They estimated, 10 to 12 years. And luckily, if you can't tell, I'm still alive. So that was a long time ago. So,
That's evident.
yeah, they came back a year later and they said, hey, listen, the misdiagnosis, it's not that, it's something to do with your spinal column and et cetera, et cetera. And so luckily on the other side of it, there was a different aha moment. But when somebody says, hey, listen, your life's going to be shorter and you really need to make sure and take care of yourself and walk through this process and do these things, the wake up call that brings, even though they say we were wrong, it doesn't disconnect that. And so you go and you look at life a little bit different every day. And I love what you said about people with major medical issues, how it completely changes your output and your outlook. And it does, and it has to. And it's just the realization of like life is finite. And whether it's cancer, whether it's heart problems, whether it's, like our friend, he's had cancer in his knee and issues like that. Like there's major things. And that just makes you realize, man, the day is so precious.
Yeah, life is beautiful, right? And I think what you said earlier really hit for me too, where it was like, where are you deriving your self-worth from? Is it your physical ability? Is it your looks? Is it your career success? Is it the amount of money in your bank account? Or is it just who you are as a person and accepting yourself? And I definitely went through that journey too. I think it's a journey that some people take longer than others to go through. Certainly a lot of people in their teenage years and in their 20s. For example, I worked in Wall Street and I worked my ass off to break into there. And I was definitely very proud of myself, getting into that and then in the private equity. But too much of my identity and self-worth was, oh, I'm the Wall Street guy, right? Or, oh, I'm making this amount of money at this age. And eventually, I did go through my form of an ego death, right? Similar to what you were
Yeah.
saying, the death of your prior self. And an ego death is pure suffering, but you come out on the other side as a new person, I think a more enlightened person and someone that is able to kind of be grateful for what they have and the small wins and really just focusing on the day-to-day, the inputs. Like it's not about, hey, did I reach 10 million at 32 years old, or did I sell my company? It's, am I doing my best? Am I showing up every single day? And I need to be happy and accept that as long as I'm doing my best, like, things are going to work out as they should.
100%. It is so true because it's all about moving that needle and constantly setting long-term goals and put short-term decisions all in play. And, let's be real. Like if life is just about making us look great, then we miss the mark. And that's where it has to go beyond that, man. It has to have a greater purpose. And we'll dig into that probably later on. But,
Yeah, no.
there's a lot there.
Yeah, no, I'm loving the commonalities in our philosophy and as entrepreneurs as well. So you're 23 years old. You kind of have to move to an entirely new career. You decide to go after the financial industry, the accounting industry. So you get your degree over the course of 4 years. I know you mentioned you had a master's degree. Like, what was the process of reinventing yourself? And like, did you ever consider going into I guess a more traditional 9 to 5, or did you jump right into entrepreneurship from there?
No, I knew that I was a little broken to be able to walk into somebody else's time clock. Like that is
Yeah.
something that, going through the process, I am built different and I'm built different everywhere from childhood. I suffered from ADHD that was undiagnosed for so many
A
years.
lot of
And
entrepreneurs, right? A lot of manic
yeah,
depressives, a lot of ADHD. Yep.
yeah, and like it's okay. Back when I was young, and my parents didn't want us to get me any symbols or say, oh yeah, this kid suffers from they didn't want me to be put into a box, and I appreciate
Sure.
that. And also even to this day, I use more like natural supplements. I don't go on any of the medicines because I don't like the way
Same.
that they make me feel. And so for me, it's all about more health and nutrition on that side. But man, when you're walking down that reinvention and dealing with that stuff, the thought of going to work for the man and work a time clock was enough to almost give me a panic attack. And it was like, nope, I'm built different. I'm going to chase different. I'm more hungry than almost anybody out there. And I'm willing to put in the grind. I just want to make sure that the rewards on the outside, once it's done, once I put in the grind, I want to make sure that the rewards are there for me to actually like succeed in the process.
Right, right. And like I've gone through that similar journey as well. I mean, even tracing back to when I was a kid, always the rebellious one. I was the oldest in my family, like always kind of rejected authority. And honestly rejected like pressure over me and like control over me. And so that really manifested in kind of a destructive way when I went into the workforce. Like I really had to bide my time. And it was a humbling experience being told what to do and like people setting deadlines, like, hey, you have to be in the office by this time. And it was kind of like that freedom moment at 27 when I decided to become an entrepreneur. And it was like, I need, like, this was my journey, and I'm
Yep.
glad I finally got here. Um, did you have like a similar hallelujah moment, or I guess like when did you start your first company? And also like to ask too, like at 29 years old, I guess I became an entrepreneur at 27. I'm now 29. Like, where were you at when you were my age? Like, what was your kind of philosophy and like what was your evolution from then until now?
Yeah, when I made the transition, launched my first business in 2008, which is the accounting firm. When you're launching it so young, and I think I was 24, and man, you just like you're a bull in a china shop. You have to smack your face against so many rocks and so many walls in order to like really learn. And at that point, I really didn't have anybody around me guiding me. I was the first entrepreneur in my family. There wasn't a lot of entrepreneurs inside my network. And so like, it was just kind of, you were working on trying to build a network, trying to, learn by trial and error and trying to figure out, okay, I know the technical side. I know how to handle people. Like sales came a little bit natural for me. And so you kind of walk through and start bridging the gap, and then you just naturally fail, and the failures aren't the end of you. The failures are the adaptation of you. And so then by the time I got to 29, I had been in business for 5 years. I went through all the panic attack seasons, those first 2 years, and you're like, what am I doing? Like, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Because you're like, man, like, where's the money? Like everybody else is getting paid. I'm just not. And so, you go through a hard time. I mean, I almost had to file for bankruptcy in that first year of business,
Um,
you know,
so you were
hard.
operating at a loss during that period of time.
Yeah, like hardly able to pay personal bills, if any, like fell behind and had to play some catch up. My credit definitely hit some dings during
Yep.
that season and, the sacrifice. But that's where the grit and the resilience and the relentless side is so vital. And so many people miss that piece. They're like, oh, I don't want to work for somebody else. I'm just going to go start a business. Like, what are you talking about? That is not the easy road. If you really want to build a business, that is not the easy road. You want to go, take the easy road, go be a greeter, go shake people's hands,
You
like
have
go
to
do
be
something
prepared for
simple.
war. You have to be prepared for war.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's not even physical, it's so psychological. And so when you're talking about from 23 to 29, man, some of the anguish that you go through, some of the doubts that you go through, you see certain people around you that are scaling their business faster. And at that point, you're like, wait a second, how are they going faster? Well, it's a different model, different business, different type. And you start doubting your model. You're looking at these different pieces like, okay, wait, they might have the quick win. Wait a second, I'm trying to build an asset. I'm building a machine that becomes unstoppable. And when you build a machine that becomes unstoppable, that makes it even more sellable. And so when you're working on this, and you got to make sure and focus on you. I use the term the outcome equation. Your fuel, your core, your lighthouse times focused action is your results. And when
Right.
you're talking about that, and you're talking about what is the goal? What are you chasing after? Who are you? What are you built for? And then what is driving you? Once you put all those things together and you add in focused action, that's when you become unstoppable. It doesn't matter what you hit, you're going to keep on chugging. You're just going to keep on moving. And that's what, when I was at 29, it was getting success. At that point, I'd already hit some successes. I had my income had gone up drastically. I'd already bypassed the goals that I had set financially for when I was a cop. Because, when you're a cop, you're making, I think my highest year during hurricanes, I think I made like $45,000. So you're like, oh man, if I just could hit six figures, if I could hit $100,000 a year, that seemed like that glory. And so then by the time I was 29, then I had already superseded those goals. And so you have kind of like these little mental breaks where you're like, wait a second, all the goals I originally set, I've achieved. So now I got to reset. And that happens at different stages in your business, and you constantly move that needle up. And, when you're talking about that, it's great. So at 29, I was revisiting exactly what the goals I was really chasing, because I was trying to decide how big of goals did I need to set at that point. And so
Right.
that's my 29-year-old phase.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of self-belief that's required to be an entrepreneur it takes an uncommon breed, as you mentioned, to be there. You need to be delusionally optimistic in your abilities, almost to the point where people are like, this guy is batshit crazy. And also it's a matter of impermanence. Like I think I subscribe to Buddhism more than any other religion, kind of more spiritual, but it's like when you're going through that micro adversity on a day-to-day basis, or a month of suffering, like a really bad month for the business, you're dealing with some big issue that you need to address. It's like, this is going to pass. You are going to be able to handle this. And you're going to look back on this in a year with a smile, and it's not going to be a big deal. And I also loved what you said about like the formula of output. I have one that's like very similar. It's Naval Ravikant, and it's basically your output is your focus times your energy. And so if you maximize your focus, you maximize your energy, that kind of determines your output as an entrepreneur, both economically and kind of various things. And that's where like the biohacking gets in with me too. I'm a huge like holistic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah.
I have a health supplement company, so I'm really into that stuff, and love that you're into that too. But yeah, no, appreciate it. And the 0 to 1 of starting a new business is always the most brain damage, where you're just like starting it completely from scratch, and you're bootstrapping it, and you're not making a lot of money. But then what was that like 1 to 10 moment for you? It seems like that was after the first 2 years, you almost filed for bankruptcy, and then you started hitting an inflection point. But like, where did you go from 29, and like, when were you like, holy shit, like this is going to be a serious business, and this is going to be kind of a life-changing experience for me?
It's the scaling of the team. Once, because in the side of the financial arenas, it's the hardest point is to get past that 5 employee mark, basically owner operator plus 5. Most accounting firms, that's their cap. And so when you hit that wall, it's like, okay, your owner operator is worked to death. And then you have your 5 employees that, you got turnover, and you do. So that's kind of like the norm inside of this space. And then what happens when you see the firms that are bigger than that, a lot of times it's mergers and like the small, you got John over here and Jim over here, and they're like, wait a second, let's just come together, do this together. Now you have 10 employees. And so
Right.
like they kind of like join forces, and that's how you see some of the firms adjust. And so in my space, like the way that my brain worked was like, okay, if I can get the teams figured out, and if I can put the formula in place to build the teams and build the dynamics, then from there, everything else becomes just like tick and tie, one step at a time. And so I set through this journey of how could I put together infrastructure. At that point was to go from, hey, listen, around 5 employees to 25. Like that was kind of that initial mark, was how do I get there? And so putting all that stuff in place and setting down the formula of how are we going to do that, that became that moment where I realized that this thing could become a bigger machine than I'd ever planned. Like, once again, cop days was, hey, I want to build this to make $100,000 a year, and I want to sell it for $1 million. Like that was the goal. And then you get to that point and you're like, $1 million ain't going to cut it. Like that's just not going to work.
Right.
And so, that was that really aha moment, right? That around that 29 to 30-year-old mark was like, okay, now I can take this thing and build this thing into a large asset that could be a potential 8-figure sale. And that's where it was like, okay, how do I make it where this machine is the train? Because that's the biggest thing is systems, processes, and teams.